Picture this. You're scrolling through your wife's emails and discover she's been living a double life, using your children as her alibi while she sneaks off to cheap motels with her high school ex-boyfriend. Most people would just file for divorce and move on. But what if I told you that by the time I was done, her lover lost his job, his family, his home, and ended up with a broken nose and criminal charges? Sometimes revenge isn't just a dish best served cold. It's a 7-course meal that destroys everything in its path. If you've ever fantasized about the perfect revenge against someone who wronged you, smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the like button if you believe in justice, and get ready for a story where betrayal meets its match in the most calculated, devastating way possible. This isn't just revenge. This is strategic warfare. Let's dive into how one man's discovery led to the complete annihilation of 2 lives. Let me take you back to the early 2000s when life seemed simpler, but secrets ran just as deep. I was living what I thought was a normal family life with my wife and our 2 young children, ages 4 and 6. You know that age where kids are like little sponges, absorbing everything around them and innocently repeating it back without understanding the weight of their words. That's exactly what started unraveling my entire world. It began subtly, the way most betrayals do. My children started mentioning their grandparents more frequently in their daily chatter. Grandma made us lunch today, or Grandpa showed us his garden. At first, I found it sweet. Kids love their grandparents and it's natural for them to visit occasionally. But then I started paying closer attention to the frequency. 2, sometimes 3 times a week, my wife was apparently taking our children to her parents' house. Now here's the thing that made my stomach churn. Her parents lived 90 minutes away. That's a 3-hour round trip minimum, not counting the time spent there. Let me paint you a picture of our routine. My wife worked part-time, maybe 3 days a week at most. So on her days off, instead of staying home or doing local activities with the kids, she was supposedly making this marathon journey to her parents' house. The math wasn't adding up and my gut was screaming that something was wrong. You know that feeling when you're standing on the edge of a cliff and every instinct tells you not to look down, but you can't help yourself? That's exactly where I found myself. I needed to know the truth, but part of me was terrified of what I might discover. So I decided to confront her directly. I approached the conversation casually, trying not to sound accusatory. Hey, seems like you're taking the kids to your parents' place a lot lately. That's quite a drive. Is everything okay with them? The response I got was immediate and telling. She became defensive, her voice taking on that higher pitch people get when they're lying. It's not that much, she said, avoiding eye contact. They like spending time with their grandchildren. Now my wife had many wonderful qualities, but lying was not one of her strengths. Her tells were obvious. The way she touched her neck when she was nervous, how she suddenly became very interested in whatever task was in front of her, the slight tremor in her voice. I'd been married to her for years. I knew when she was being dishonest, but knowing someone is lying and proving it are 2 entirely different things. I needed evidence, not just suspicion. That's when I decided to do something that felt both necessary and invasive. I started tracking the mileage on her car. Every morning before she left, I'd casually walk past her car and note the odometer reading. When she returned, I'd check it again. What I discovered made my blood run cold. She was driving an additional 400 miles per week. 400 miles. To put that in perspective, a round trip to her parents' house was about 180 miles. Even if she was going there 3 times a week, that should have been roughly 540 miles total. But the numbers showed she was driving far more than that pattern would suggest. The weight of this discovery settled on my chest like a stone. My wife wasn't just visiting her parents. She was going somewhere else, doing something else, and using our children as her cover story. The betrayal felt suffocating, but I still didn't have the full picture. I needed more concrete evidence of what was actually happening during these mysterious trips. And then, as if the universe decided to hand me the key to the truth, it happened. One evening, I sat down at our shared computer to check my own email. There, stuck to the monitor like a neon sign announcing my wife's guilt, was a yellow sticky note with her AOL password written in her handwriting. She'd left it there, probably after checking her email earlier and forgetting to remove it. I stared at that sticky note for what felt like an eternity. My hands were shaking. This was the moment of truth. I could either ignore it and continue living in uncertainty, or I could log in and potentially discover something that would change everything. You know what I chose. My fingers trembled as I typed in her password. The AOL interface loaded with its familiar dial-up sound. And suddenly I was looking at her inbox. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt like I was violating her privacy, but at the same time, I felt like I was uncovering a violation of my own trust. I scrolled through her emails, looking for anything that seemed out of place. And then I found them. A series of email exchanges between her and her college best friend. The subject lines were innocuous enough, but when I opened them, my world exploded. The emails detailed everything. My wife was having an affair with one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. The casual way they discussed it made my stomach turn. But what made it even worse was how they talked about his wife, making cruel jokes about how she'd gotten fat after having kids, mocking her appearance, laughing about how clueless she was. The callousness of it all hit me like a physical blow. Here was my wife, the mother of my children, not only betraying our marriage, but also participating in the humiliation of another innocent woman, the woman who was being cheated on just like I was. I read every single email, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. The details were all there, how she would drop our kids off at her parents' house, meet this guy for lunch, and then spend hours at some cheap motel before picking up the children and coming home to me. She was using our children as alibis for her affair, making them unknowing accomplices in the destruction of our family. But I'm not an impulsive person. Even in my fury, I knew I needed to be smart about this. I printed out every single email exchange and hid them in a safe place. These weren't just evidence of her betrayal. They were going to be the foundation of my revenge. But I still needed more details. I needed names, locations, times, photographs, evidence that would be irrefutable. So I called a friend of mine who worked as a police officer. When I explained my situation, he immediately recommended someone who could help. "You need to call Ron," he said. "He used to be on the force, but now he works as a private investigator. If anyone can get you the evidence you need, it's him." Ron turned out to be exactly what I needed. Professional, discreet, and incredibly thorough. When I met with him, I handed over the printed emails and explained everything I'd discovered. He listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "I can get you everything you need," he said. "Photos, dates, times, locations, the whole picture. But I need to ask you something. What are you planning to do with this information?" I told him I was planning to file for divorce, which was true, but I didn't tell him about the other plan that was already forming in my mind. The plan that would ensure this betrayal didn't just end my marriage, it would end their affair in the most devastating way possible. Ron got to work immediately. Within 2 weeks, he had compiled a comprehensive report that detailed every aspect of my wife's affair. The photos were devastating. Clear shots of her and this man entering and leaving the motel, timestamps showing exactly when she was supposed to be at her parents' house versus when she was actually meeting her lover. But Ron didn't stop there. He also investigated the man she was having the affair with. Let's call him Bob, as that's what I learned his name was. And what Ron discovered about Bob was absolutely perfect for what I had planned. Bob was married with 3 children. He worked as a vice president of sales, but here's the beautiful part. He worked for his father-in-law's company. His wife's father owned the business where Bob had built his career. Even better, Bob and his wife didn't own their house. They lived in a property owned by his wife's parents. Do you see the beautiful irony here? Bob had built his entire life on the foundation of his marriage and his in-laws' generosity. His job, his home, his financial security, all of it depended on his relationship with his wife's family, and he was throwing it all away for an affair with my wife. This is when I realized that my revenge wouldn't just be about ending the affair or getting my divorce. This was about destroying Bob's entire life piece by piece using the very foundations he'd built it on. I hired a divorce attorney and had them draw up the papers. But I also asked Ron to make several additional copies of his investigation report. I had a special plan for those extra copies. The day I decided to execute my plan was a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because I wanted to make sure both Bob and my wife would be at their respective workplaces when everything went down. Timing was crucial for maximum impact. At exactly 2 p.m., I had my wife served with divorce papers at her workplace. I wanted her to be blindsided, to have no warning that I knew about her affair. I wanted her to experience that moment of pure panic when she realized her secret was out. But that was just the beginning. At exactly the same time, I had Ron deliver a complete copy of his investigation report to Bob's wife. Everything. The photos, the timestamps, the detailed documentation of every single meeting between Bob and my wife. I wanted her to know everything, to see exactly how her husband had been betraying her. Now I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this out of malice toward Bob's wife. I did it because I believed she deserved to know the truth. If I were in her position, I would want someone to tell me. She was as much a victim in this situation as I was, and she had the right to make informed decisions about her life. What happened next exceeded even my wildest expectations. Bob's wife didn't just confront him, she went nuclear. According to the court documents that later became public record, she cleaned out their joint bank account within hours of receiving the report. She took the children and left the house that same day. But here's where it gets even better. She immediately called her father and told him everything. Her father, who owned the company where Bob worked, was absolutely furious. Bob wasn't just an employee. He was family, someone who had been trusted with a vice president position in a family business. The betrayal cut deep. Bob was fired immediately. Not laid off, not given a chance to resign, fired. His father-in-law made sure that Bob's termination was swift and public within their industry. Word spread quickly about why Bob had been let go, effectively destroying his professional reputation. And remember that house they lived in? The one owned by Bob's wife's parents? Well, Bob received an eviction notice within a week. His in-laws wanted him out of their property immediately. But the destruction didn't stop there. Bob's wife filed for divorce, and it was absolutely brutal. She had all the evidence from Ron's report, plus she had the backing of her family's resources. Bob found himself facing a legal battle he couldn't win, with attorneys he couldn't afford, fighting for custody of children who no longer wanted to see him. The court proceedings were a disaster for Bob. Every detail of his affair became public record. His lies, his betrayal, his callous disregard for his family. It was all laid bare for everyone to see. And then things got physically violent. According to the police reports, Bob apparently went to his former home to try to talk to his wife. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument, and when his wife's brother tried to intervene, Bob became aggressive. The brother, protecting his sister, ended up breaking Bob's nose. This led to Bob being arrested and charged with disturbing the peace and assault. He spent the night in jail and was served with a restraining order. But Bob apparently didn't learn his lesson. There were several more incidents. Him showing up at his wife's workplace trying to contact her through mutual friends, even attempting to get the children from their school. Each incident resulted in more police reports, more court appearances, and more legal fees that Bob couldn't afford. His life was spiraling completely out of control, and every decision he made seemed to make things worse. The final straw came when Bob violated the restraining order by calling his wife repeatedly from different phone numbers. This resulted in criminal charges and actual jail time. The man who had been a vice president of a successful company was now a convicted criminal with a record. I watched all of this unfold from a distance, following the court documents and occasionally hearing updates through mutual acquaintances. It was like watching a controlled demolition. Everything Bob had built his life on was systematically destroyed, and it was all his own fault. Meanwhile, my own divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward. While the affair evidence didn't matter much legally in terms of asset division, it did help establish the timeline and facts of our separation. My wife knew she had been caught red-handed, and she didn't try to fight the divorce or make unreasonable demands. But here's what's really interesting. After Bob's life imploded, my wife realized she'd been having an affair with someone who had absolutely nothing left to offer her. No job, no money, no home, no family, no future. She'd thrown away her marriage for someone who turned out to be a complete loser. The last I heard about Bob, he had left the state entirely. I couldn't find any trace of him online, which suggests he either changed his name or has been living completely under the radar. His ex-wife, on the other hand, thrived. She went to work for her father's company and eventually took over when he retired. She rebuilt her life, raised her children, and moved on to bigger and better things. As for my relationship with my ex-wife, we managed to maintain a civil co-parenting relationship. I made it clear that I would only communicate with her about matters related to our children, and I stuck to that boundary. Now that our kids are adults, I don't speak to her at all anymore. I don't hate her. I don't wish her ill, but I also don't have any desire to have her in my life beyond the fact that she's the mother of my children. She made her choices and she had to live with the consequences. The beautiful thing about this entire situation is how perfectly everything worked out. Bob thought he could have his cake and eat it too. keep his comfortable life while sneaking around with my wife. He never considered that his actions might have consequences beyond getting caught. But that's the thing about revenge. True revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about using someone's own actions and choices against them. I didn't destroy Bob's life. He destroyed it himself. I just made sure the right people knew about it. Every single consequence Bob faced was a direct result of his own decisions. He chose to have an affair. He chose to risk his marriage, his job, his home, and his children for a few hours in a cheap motel. He chose to build his entire life on relationships that he was willing to betray. When everything came crashing down, he had no one to blame but himself. And that's the most satisfying kind of justice. The kind where the punishment fits the crime perfectly. Looking back on this experience, I learned something important about betrayal and consequences. Sometimes the best revenge isn't something you do to someone else. It's simply making sure they face the natural consequences of their own actions. Bob thought he was smart enough to get away with his betrayal, but he wasn't smart enough to consider what would happen when the truth came out. What do you think? Was my revenge justified, or did I go too far? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of calculated justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of revenge served cold. And here's a question for you. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Share your stories in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own choices.